Greetings, everyone, to all my followers of darkness, shadow scavengers, and villainy aficionados. Welcome, bienvenue to one of my good old-fashioned villains review episodes. I'm your host, Laura Shadows, and today I want to discuss about a certain character that I wanted to discuss for like a very, very long time. And ever since like Sonic 3 came out, I was like, you know what? Now is the good time to do it. Of course, the character I'm talking about is, of course, none other than one of the most infamous, second greatest Hedgehog character in all the video game industry, and of course in the Sonic the Hedgehog series, Shadow. Shadow the Hedgehog. Yep. By the way, I'm not gonna talk about the movie version. I'm gonna talk about the video game character, character in general. So, without any further ado, let's begin. By the way, if anyone who hasn't met with Shadow the Hedgehog before, I mean, as a character, I mean, what the hell you're doing? I'm gonna talk about some certain heavy spoiler material in my villains discussion, so you have been warned. So, five, four, three, two, one. Let's begin, shall we? So basically, with the start of as I like to call it, this is your evil life. Basically, Shadow the Hedgehog first appeared in the Sonic Adventures 2. Basically, he was the creation of Gerald Robotnik, also known as the Ultimate Life Form, using the DNA of another Sonic villain called Black Doom, who I think was the main villain in the Shadow the Hedgehog video game. I'm not quite sure about that. Basically, to kind of like being this vessel to use him as like sort of like a way to find cures for incurable diseases, just like the same thing with Maria Robotnik's character as well, since she also suffered from an incurable disease. And throughout basically his entire life, past life, basically, the only one people he knew was Gerald Robotnik and Maria Robotnik. But of course, everything came to an end when, of course, Gunn and the government got involved. Gerald Robotnik got arrested and shot. The Project Shadow was shut down, and of course, Mario Robotnik met with a very, very tragic end. He went in sleep mode, and of course, after 50 years, he has been awakened and vowing revenge on humanity. Oh man, I mean, I've like Shadow the Hedgehog. I always found him like he's one of those characters when it comes to not just simply Sonic characters, but characters in general. He was one of those characters that I always found very fascinating. Because as a type of villain, well, I know that later on, he's mostly considered as an anti-hero because his change of heart and everything after Sonic Adventures 2 and everything. I get it. I get it. But so far, I'm gonna talk about his overall villain side of the story ever since his very first appearance, basically. I mean, I know today, if you're gonna type Shadow as a villain, like he would be basically a vengeful rival. You know, like that's basically the sort of kind of like the title I would give to villains like Shadow the Hedgehog. But anyway, going back to him, basically Shadow for me, like he was always the counterpart of Sonic. Like he was basically the opposite, just like Vegeta was for Goku, Reverse Flash was for the Flash, or even Shadow Joker was for Joker, basically. So like Shadow is basically the same thing. Like he's like the type of villain who's plays the role of the opposite of the main hero. Like for example, Sonic being all energetic, cracking jokes, relax, and almost sort of like a loose cannon, but in a positive way. Shadow basically is the opposite. He is he can be like very stubborn, cold, ruthless. He's not the type of person who will make jokes, or even show any positivity in general. Basically, like I said, he's like the complete opposite. As a character to Sonic, and even though, like I said, when you see his design, he's almost like identical to what Sonic was. The only difference is that Sonic is like an actual being from a different world, and Shadow is like basically this artificial being that was created on Earth, basically. Even though yes, I will admit that Gerald Robotnik did use the DNA of a cosmic entity, aka Black Doom, to create him. So you can kind of say he was a little bit alien as well, but in general, he was created by humans, basically. But there's a lot about him, like, I really like, and even though I would say, like, even though his goal, when he was introduced as a villain, not just like through the Sonic Adventures 2, but even like, in the in Sonic the Hedgehog, free movie, or Sonic X, like, he always had like one desire, and that is basically, to get revenge on humanity for what happened to Maria, because, being who he was, and like, Maria was the only thing, the only, like, I would say, like, she was the only human contact that he made. Well, I mean, okay, besides Gerald, of course. She was like the only like true pure human contact that he ever had. So yeah, so I kind of, get the idea where he's coming from. But like I said, from but I would say, like, from his design, from his personality, from his overall goal and everything, like, I would say, even though his villain goal is very classic, but I always find him kind of like a in a villain sort of way. I always find him like to be a very impressive character, in general. And I have to say, like, when it comes to combat, like, this guy is such a badass. But also, he's a villain that has been through a lot, and I mean, the way how he was created and everything, like, like this guy, like, he has PTSD, like, 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 he basically, like, for throughout, like, the video games and different, like, medias, he also had like many different, like, glimpses and memories of, like, what happened to Maria, when Gon invaded the Ark Station, and like, when, the kind of death that she met, basically, like, yeah, like, the guy has been through a lot. Like, there are a lot, like, he had a lot of massive mental scars, while he was in sleep mode, basically. Or was it like a cryogenic freeze? Freeze. I meant to say cryogenic freeze. Fleas. Jesus. Yeah, I wonder if it was a cryogenic freeze or like a sleep mode or something. Like, like, that's the one part I always find a little bit interesting and confusing. But, like, but basically he was a villain, or in this case, anti-hero. Like, he was someone who has been through a lot, like, like, having such a massive tragedy in his past life that literally can leave anyone scarred. I mean, one of the worst things when it comes to villains, and I'm I'm gonna go into the villain's origin story, because that's literally what it's all about. One of the things that is like one of the most, like, tragic elements when it comes to villain's origin story is basically to see your loved ones being killed, like, personally, being right there in the same room and seeing what happened. Like, that could leave literally a massive scar, and also give you a really big reason for someone to become a villain, because, in this case, just like Shadow. Now, when it comes to his overall villain origin story, I always kind of consider him to be, something similar to, like, what Frankenstein's monster was. Because, like, think about it. Both were created by scientists. They had no connection, no attachments, to the human world, besides, like, the people who created him, or in Shadow's case, or alongside Maria Robotnik as well. The only knowledge they had was the surroundings that they were in. Like, Frankenstein's monster was like the castle, with the with Dr. Frankenstein, and for Shadow, the space station Ark. Like that, like, that's the only thing he had. Everything else, like, if it's like, when his relationship with Maria and everything, like, all the other human elements that he's seen, like, from hills to flowers to fields and everything, it was all holograms. It was all projections. Like, it wasn't the real thing, basically. And the only human connection he had was, again, back into Shadow's case, the only human connections that he had was Maria. And basically, of course, when you take something like that from them, from those kind of creations, you know they think like the rest of the world is going to be, is evil. That is dark, like, that they think like the only people who were good are basically their creators, or their creators family, when it comes to, like, Shadow's case. Because, like, yeah, and even though, because again, it's very traditional. That when it comes to, like, this sort of, like, villain's origin story, it's very traditional, to have, like, this kind of, like, elements, especially, like, if a main villain is something that was created by someone else. Like for example, like Ant-Man created Ultron, and how slowly he became evil, and basically had his kind of created his own beliefs and agendas and everything, like believing that humans, not only that humans are evil, but also like that the only thing that should rule the world is metal. I know I'm going all over the places, but I'm trying to kind of give you guys like kind of like an example of like usually how paths of those creations turn out. You know, basically like from like different from like different like tragedies, events, opinions, actions, everything that basically surrounds them. They basically decide. They basically start to create their own opinions. Basically, that they're kind of like their own point of view. In a kind of like a kind of like twisted way. Basically, let's just put it that way. When Frankenstein's monster lost his creator, although like in some stories like he's the one who killed him, but but you kind of get the idea, basically, you know. But so again, going back to like to Shadow's origin story, like I said, Maria was the only friend that or should I say, besides Gerald, like Maria was the only friend he ever had, the only attachment he ever had, the only connection to the human world basically he ever had. And basically, for someone like him, for knowing this, for like knowing like her, like being the only thing he ever had, kind of created basically a massive scar, in his mind and everything. So it kind of also, which is kind of like the reason why he was drawn into vengeance and everything. Because again, and one of the main reasons, which I'm going to talk about a little bit on, is because like since she was the only one he knew, you can easily think like everyone else beside them like are evil and everything. But again, so in the end, village like when it comes to Shadow's origin story, again, very traditional, very classic, but still the execution, the way how they did it, it was actually still very impressive, very very impressive. I mean, and not to mention like for what happened to him, I can kind of get the idea why why Shadow why Shadow has PTSD. I mean, like with everything that happened, anyone would. I mean, just take Batman when he saw the murder of his own parents. I mean, that's a massive PTSD effect. But you get the idea. Now, of course, with every villain, of course, you're going to have to talk about strengths, skills, and weaknesses. Now, when it comes to like strengths and skill, oh my god, like the one thing I can tell you, any villain with everything that Shadow possesses, it's literally what we will call a mother load, or basically hitting the jackpot. Like from like Shadow throughout the entire Sonic franchise, like literally he has like from artificial physiology, black arms physiology, genius level intelligence, superhuman speed, strength, agility, endurance, stamina, jump, inhibitor rings, like very nigh immortality, teleportation, hand-to-hand combat, martial arts, which makes him master competent, fighting skills, acrobatics, temporary time stop, firearm mastery, heavy weapons, and small arm expert, which kind of goes to the Shadow the Hedgehog video game. Gunmanship, again, Shadow the Hedgehog, video game. Marksmanship, same thing. Shooting skills, driving skills, car, truck, and motorcycle expert, again, everything Shadow centric. Super transformation, huge area of weapons or huge area of vehicles, chaos based powers, wing manifestation, and of course, not to mention chaos control. So literally, for any villain, this is like the mother load of all, like when it comes to like skills. Like one thing for certain we can all agree is that when it comes to strength and skills, like Shadow is perfect. Now when it comes to like when it comes to that part, now when it comes to like weaknesses, usually with the villains, usually it's the character, it's character itself, or like their own personality. I mean, like for example, I always thought like one of the flaws for Shadow was always like that he was arrogant, stubborn, also a recluse, or should I say more precisely, a reclusive and a loner, or as some people say, antisocial, loner, which is kind of like a very traditional thing for someone like Shadow, because like, while Sonic and everyone else like they get around together, he's usually always, basically on its own. Like, he's basically a lonesome space cowboy hedgehog or whatever, which is kind of, I think like it's one of his weaknesses, when being a loner and everything, because like I mean, when it comes to Shadow, with everything that happened to him, and also like the events and everything, I kind of see the reason why. First and foremost, like having Maria being the only one that he cared and being friends with and everything, like kind of also leads to kind of like maybe not trusting anyone else. Like she was the only one he trusted, and after everything that happened to him, like with Gunn and the government and everything, so I thought, and also Dr. Eggman, manipulating him and using him to for his own personal goals. So which kind of being a loner, like I said, that also kind of goes into like basically not to trust anyone, because like after everything that happened to him, you can kind of also assume that he has trust issues. And also at the same time being for him being an antisocial loner, I would say maybe is the reason, because like he blames himself for with everything that happened. Like he was the one responsible, for basically destroying Earth, in short. Although and also like I mean, like I said, Shadow's also very famous for like for being ruthless and aggressive, like which also a lot of times I've seen like leads to fear, and his basically his enemies, other characters being nervous around him. But to mention like from his like as they would say, unshakable intent or sheer power in combat, but also at the same time, like I said, he is very arrogant. Also, he has a very very big ego. Not to mention that he is also self-absorbed. Which a type of character like Shadow is. You kind of get the idea. You kind of get the idea. And almost every single time, the way how he battles other characters, and the way how he criticizes their lack of strength. I mean, again, which kind of goes back to the ego thing. So and not to mention, and also not to mention that sometimes there's a lot of times where basically even Shadow can be very disturbed. Like the way how he hunts down, like his own targets or other enemies. And the way how he talks to them. Like he also, one of the things I will admit, like I said, one of the things I will respect for Shadow is that he has conviction, for sure. That's one thing, and the other thing is that he will do whatever it takes to complete his mission or his goals in general. Like I said, just basically destroy everything in his way just to get to what he wants. If it's like chaos emeralds or a target, like it doesn't matter to him. Like he will do whatever it takes just to get to them. Which is again very which again means that he has conviction. You know and he's determined to do whatever it takes to complete whatever he has. But basically I would say his weaknesses for Shadow are definitely basically all about his character. I think that's where the weaknesses are. Like I said, he can be very self-absorbed, very egotistical. He can be, from being ruthless and a social loner, from like, being arrogant, a lot of times underestimating his enemies, which of course, gave him a big bite up his ass, every single time, especially when he's fighting Sonic. Like, yeah, it's basically, it's basically the weaknesses are all around his character, because like, I mean, look, when you have villains, of course, a lot of times villains have egos. Of course, a lot of times, villains, how can I put this? Underestimate their opponents. Of course, villains have arrogance. Of course, villains are ruthless. Of course, villains can be self-absorbed. Maybe some of them even being loners. Like I said, for Shadow's case, I think the biggest reason is because like he doesn't trust anyone. Like especially with everything that happened to him. I think like, and also maybe at the same time because of like if he's conscious of like with everything he was planning to do with the Arc Station, to get his revenge on Maria and everything, for killing Maria and everything. So it's kind of like, I would say the reason why he's a loner. I think it's kind of like a mixture. Also, at the same time, I think one of the things why he, I think one of the reasons why he's a loner is because, like, he doesn't like, partying, friends, fun, like those are all things I think that they're completely new to him. You know, I feel like because again, the only fun and everything he had was with Maria. Not to mention also being her, her bodyguard, sort of, you know. But at the same time, like one of the things I always hated is that you have villains who criticize other characters, other, like, in this case, like heroes' powers. Like, you lack ambition, you lack conviction, you are unskilled, untrained, unworthy. You're blind. You're your unwillingness to do this and this and that. Like, I mean, at the same time, like, you could say that sometimes villains can kind of get through those kind of insults. You can kind of say villains can give, like, good advice, basically, or so that basically the heroes can be prepared next time. But everything has a limit, Like, sure, you can criticize your opponents, but not all the time, because like that way you can just simply get carried away, And when you get carried away, that's where basically you can get distracted. And sometimes Shadow also got distracted, but there's a lot of elements about him, that I will give him credit for sure. Now, villain's goal. Now, I will say this: like Shadow has a lot of goals. Okay, Shadow has a lot of goals, throughout the entire Sonic franchise. So I'm gonna try to concentrate on the reasons why at first he was a villain, which is basically, like I said, his main goal was revenge to basically what happened to Maria, for what Gun did to her and everything. Like, he was blaming them, or should I say, not just simply them, but the entire humanity, because basically taking away the only person he ever loved, the only person he ever cared for, like the only person that he would consider a friend, And even though, again, is classic, his goal is classic, but still, in a very ironic way, it's also a little bit, creative, because it's one of those vengeance type of, like, goals that you kind of also, connect with the villain. You kind of also understand where they're coming from. You kind of also understand the reasoning behind it. And also, one of the things I forgot to mention about Shadow, because, like, especially with the whole arc thing, Shadow also is that of villain that, he doesn't care if he kills himself in the process when when his goal is complete. When it comes to, like, destroying humanity, in this case, like, that's also one of the things that you know that's also one of the things that I think, like, it's, I wouldn't say it's very rare. I would say it's medium when it comes to, like, having other villains, thinking like that. But one of the things for sure is, I always said, when you have a fearless villain, that is even way worse than having a villain who's a coward. And Shadow is definitely like a fearless, was like a fearless character, and those types of villains are like one of the most dangerous ones in fiction. So, and I will give him, ironically, in a bizarre way, I will give him respect for, like, even willing to sacrifice himself, just so basically he can complete his revenge. But I will say this. Also, the same time, even though he is revenge, but also the same time, people have to realize that the reason why he wanted to get revenge on the world, is because after 50 years, when he became awakened, basically, he had bits and pieces of Maria's memories. Like, he didn't have the full thing, because you have to remember. Like, at first, Shadow had amnesia. Like, he didn't remember the whole thing. Only at the end, of course, coincidentally, like, he, or should I say, ironically, he. No, I was going to say that in a convenient way. Like, he remembered the whole memory, the whole thing, at the end of Sonic Adventures 2. Well, not the dark side story, but like the hero story. Like, he remembered the whole thing at the end, what happened, and what actually Maria wanted from him and everything. Like for example, like with first Shadow fought from those like bits and pieces of his memory. Fought like that. Maria wanted for Shadow to get revenge on uh, on the world and everything. But what she actually wanted from him was to protect the people of Earth. To be their friend and everything. Like when basically the entire memory came back. I mean, again, I'm taking bits and pieces also from Sonic X, as well. But you get the idea. So basically, I would say that the reasoning behind his villainous career, and also the first Vengeance, I think you can kind of also say it came out from like his amnesia, basically. No, or should say it came basically from his amnesia effect, basically. Like where basically he took, instead of like trying to put all the pieces of the puzzle together, he only basically got like bits and pieces, before he could actually got all the pieces and everything. I know for a lot of people, it won't make sense what I'm talking about right now, but you're gonna get the idea. But overall, his villain goal basically, again, very traditional, but at the same time, you can understand, where he's coming from and everything. But and also speaking of like one of the weaknesses, I just want to say very briefly, Shadow sometimes can be even very naive. Okay, let's just put it this way: Shadow can be very naive sometimes. Even though again, the first it was because of the amnesia, but the way how Dr. Eggman manipulated him, I just have to say, he has a little bit of he is a little bit naive, but overall, you know, as like the villain side of his character, very formidable. That's for sure. With that being said, it just simply brings me at the end of the with the what I was trying to say is that sometimes that's a fucking problem. Like sometimes when I talk too fast, like my tongue just simply wraps around like like it was made of like it was rope or something. Anyway, what I was trying to say now is that we finally came to the end, which of course it comes to me to rate the villain from 1 to 10 shadows. And when it comes to, no pun intended, when it comes to like Shadow the Hedgehog, I'm gonna give him an 8.5 out of 10 shadows as a villain. I felt like he was very impressive, very like he's one of those villains that I also love, that only not only has intelligence, but at the same time he has like skills in combat as well. Because usually sometimes when you create a villain, usually you have to choose one of them. But I always said like, hey, why can you have both? So and Shadow was like the complete package when it comes to like having intellect, and also at the same time, combat skills. But even though taking it, because like he turned to later on as an anti-hero, also at the same time, the weaknesses that he possessed, which is basically mostly around his character, not to mention also being naive and everything, and also having a very classic, villain goal, which of course, like I say, is revenge. But I would say it's revenge, but like in a bit of a creative way, but also creative and understanding way. But I still think 8.5 out of 10 for Shadow. I think like it's a pretty great score when it comes to overall villainy. And with that being said, we have come to an end to another villains review episode, guys. When it comes to that, you guys know the drill. Comment, like, subscribe. Personal thoughts about like Shadow the Hedgehog's character, about like when was the first time you were ever introduced to the character, or anything in general about the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. Just put it in the comment section down below. By the way, if you wanna see more of my previous like villains review season 2 episodes, or even season 1 episodes, they're gonna be in the video description down below. And without any further, stay tuned for more. See you guys next time. And as always, Lord of Shadows signing off, or as I like to say, later, fuckers.